The little black girl knocked on the biker's outpost door, saying her stepfather met a stranger behind the barracks. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The sun had barely risen over the dusty town of Riverside when a little black girl, no more than 8 years old, staggered toward the biker outpost. Her eyes were wide with fear, her small hands trembling as she knocked on the heavy wooden door. The sound echoed across the otherwise quiet morning. The door creaked open, revealing a tall, heavily tattooed man who had seen more danger than most could imagine. His face softened as he saw the girl standing there, her clothes torn and face streaked with dirt and tears. "What's wrong, kid?" he asked, his voice low and steady. The girl, gasping for breath, looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "My stepfather," she whispered, voice shaky. "He met a stranger behind the barracks. I think he's doing something bad." The biker's heart sank. He crouched down to her level, studying her carefully. The girl looked scared, but there was something in her eyes, something that told him this wasn't just a child's wild imagination. He motioned for her to come inside, and as she stepped in, he could feel the weight of the situation settling over him. "Take a seat, sweetheart. Let me get you some water," he said as he led her to a nearby table. His mind raced. He had a promise to keep to his club, a promise that meant keeping things quiet, staying out of trouble. But the urgency in the little girl's voice made it clear. Something was wrong, and she needed help. He could tell she had been through something traumatic. She was far too young to be carrying that kind of weight. As he handed her the water, his mind drifted to his own daughter. No parent should ever have to worry about a child being in danger. The biker gripped the edge of the table, feeling a wave of protectiveness wash over him. "What's your name, kid?" he asked softly, trying to break the tension. "Maya," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maya, listen to me," the biker said, kneeling down in front of her. "Tell me what you saw. We're going to help you, but I need to know exactly what's going on." Maya hesitated for a moment, but then she spoke. "He's been acting strange," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "He's been meeting with that man behind the barracks. I don't know who he is, but I heard them talking about bad things. And then he told me to go inside, but I didn't want to. I knew something was wrong." The biker's instincts kicked in. This wasn't just a case of a runaway kid. There was something deeper, something darker happening here. He could feel it in his bones. He had to act fast. Without another word, he stood up, his mind already working through the plan. "Maya, I need you to stay here for a minute, okay?" he said. "I'm going to call some people who can help." As he stepped away to make a quick call to his club, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The danger was real, and it was closing in fast. The little girl had come to the right place. He wasn't sure what they were going to find, but one thing was certain. No one was going to hurt this child. Not on his watch. The biker paced the floor, his boots clicking softly against the concrete as his mind raced. Maya, still sitting at the table, clutched the water bottle tightly, her eyes wide with fear. She hadn't said much more since her initial plea, but her trembling hands spoke volumes. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the lights and the occasional rumble of a motorcycle outside. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. His club was already on its way, but they needed to move fast. The more time they wasted, the more dangerous the situation became. He picked up his phone, his fingers flying over the screen as he sent a message to his crew. "Emergency. Need everyone. Something's off. We're not leaving this kid alone." The response came back quickly, his crew's. "Loyalty is clear as ever. On our way. We ride as family." The biker exhaled slowly, grateful for the backup. But he knew it wouldn't be enough to just ride in and kick down doors. They needed information, a plan. He turned back to Maya. "You said your stepfather was meeting a stranger behind the barracks. What else did you hear? Anything else that seemed strange?" Maya hesitated, glancing at the floor. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. I heard them talking about some kind of deal. They were planning something. I don't know what it was, but it sounded bad. He said he was going to make a lot of money. And then he told me to go inside. I didn't want to, but he..." She paused, the memory clearly haunting her. The biker could see the fear in her eyes. He kneeled in front of her again, trying to calm her. Maya, listen to me. We're going to take care of you. No one is going to hurt you. Can you show me where this happened? Where you saw them talking? Maya nodded slowly, her eyes still wide with worry. I can show you. But I'm scared, mister. I don't want to go back there. The biker placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but comforting. You don't have to go back there. We'll handle it. But we need to know where we're going. Maya took a deep breath and nodded again. It's behind the big building. The one near the edge of the camp. The barracks, it's not far from here. The biker stood up, his mind already planning their next move. His phone buzzed again, another message from his crew. We're close. You still need backup. The biker didn't hesitate. Yes. Get here fast. We might be walking into something bigger than we thought. He looked back at Maya. We're going to go now. I need you to stay close to me. Can you do that? Maya nodded, standing up slowly, still looking uncertain but trusting. They moved towards the door, the biker glancing out into the early morning light. His mind was already on the possible dangers ahead. The stranger Maya had described, the deal that was happening behind the barracks, none of it made sense. The more he thought about it, the more it felt like they were dealing with something far more serious than just a family dispute. As they stepped outside, the sound of approaching motorcycles echoed down the street. He turned to Maya. This is it. Stay close to me, and we'll get through this. As the bikes pulled up, the riders dismounted quickly, all of them familiar faces. The biker's crew was ready, their expressions hard as stone. One of them, a burly man named Storm, approached. What's the situation? The biker asked. Storm looked at Maya, his eyes narrowing. She all right? Maya nodded silently. She's scared, but she's okay. We need to get to the barracks, fast. She says there's a deal going down there. The crew exchanged looks, their faces serious. We're ready, Storm said, motioning for everyone to mount up. Let's go. As the engines roared to life, the biker felt a wave of determination flood through him. They weren't just riding for a promise. They were riding to protect someone who needed them. The bikes rumbled down the street, heading toward the edge of town, where the barracks stood dark and silent against the pale sky. The closer they got, the more tense the air became. The biker could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They weren't sure what they were walking into, but one thing was certain. They weren't going to stop until Maya was safe. They reached the barracks quickly, parking their bikes in the shadows. The group moved quietly, their boots making no sound on the gravel. The biker turned to Maya. Stay here, he said, as gently as he could. We'll handle it. You're safe now. Maya nodded, her eyes wide with worry. Be careful, she whispered. The biker gave her a reassuring smile, then turned to his crew. We go in quiet. No violence unless we have to. Let's see what's going on. They moved toward the back of the building, careful to avoid being seen. The closer they got, the more the tension in the air seemed to thicken. They reached the corner of the barracks and stopped, listening. There were voices, low and muffled, coming from behind the building. The biker motioned for his crew to stay back and crept closer. As he peered around the corner, he saw two men talking. One of them was Maya's stepfather. The other was the stranger. And they were shaking hands, a briefcase. Between them, the biker crouched low, his eyes narrowing as he watched the exchange between Maya's stepfather and the stranger. They were standing in the dim light behind the barracks, the sounds of the wind rustling through the trees masking their conversation. The stranger's voice was low and smooth, too smooth for comfort. He was saying something about payments and timing, words that sent a chill down the biker's spine. Maya's stepfather, his face twisted with greed and anger, nodded eagerly as he took the briefcase from the stranger. The biker's grip tightened on the handle of his knife, but he knew they had to be careful. A single misstep could make things worse. He motioned for his crew to stay back, his eyes scanning the surroundings. They were outnumbered, but they had the element of surprise. Stay quiet, he whispered to his closest members. We need to get closer. Slowly, they crept forward, their footsteps silent on the gravel as they approached the men. The biker could feel his heart racing. He was just about to move closer when one of his crew members, Storm, suddenly held up a hand, signaling for him to stop. Something's not right, Storm whispered. The biker nodded, his instincts kicking in. Storm was right. There was something off about this whole situation. The briefcase wasn't the only thing that seemed wrong. The way the stranger looked around nervously, constantly checking the area, gave the biker a bad feeling. They had to be careful. The biker motioned for Storm to keep watching, then signaled for the others to circle around the back of the building. They would cut off any escape routes. As they moved, the biker's mind raced. Maya had said her stepfather was planning a deal, but this was bigger than just some shady transaction. It was clear now that they were dealing with something far more dangerous. As they closed in, the biker's thoughts went to Maya. She was safe, for now, but her life was about to change forever. They couldn't afford to fail her. The stranger handed the briefcase to Maya's stepfather, who opened it briefly before quickly snapping it shut. The biker watched, his breath held, as the two men exchanged a few more words. Maya's stepfather turned and walked toward the back of the barracks, his hands clutching the briefcase tightly. The biker waited, then gestured for his crew to move. They followed, staying low as they trailed behind. As they neared the back door of the barracks, the biker signaled for everyone to stop. He could hear footsteps approaching from the other side. It was Maya's stepfather. He was coming back this way. The biker motioned for Storm and the others to hide behind a nearby pile of crates, while he positioned himself just out of sight, waiting for the right moment. As Maya's stepfather neared, the biker stepped forward, his shadow falling across the man. The stepfather froze, his eyes widening in surprise and fear. "You thought you could get away with this?" The biker growled, his voice low and dangerous. The stepfather's hand went for the briefcase, but the biker was faster. In a flash, he grabbed the man's wrist and twisted it behind his back, forcing him to drop the case. The stepfather let out a yelp of pain, but the biker didn't let up. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. "What's in the case?" he demanded, his voice cold. The stepfather struggled against the biker's grip, but it was no use. The biker was built like a wall, and the stepfather was no match for his strength. "You don't want to know?" The stepfather gasped, his voice shaking with fear. "This is bigger than you. Bigger than your club. You don't know what you're getting into." The biker's eyes narrowed. "I know enough," he said, tightening his grip. "Now tell me what's in the case." The stepfather's face twisted with frustration, but he finally relented. "Drugs," he spat. "Drugs and guns. A deal that's going down tonight. If you think you can stop it, you're wrong." The biker's heart skipped a beat. This was bigger than he had imagined. A deal involving drugs and guns meant trouble, and lots of it. He motioned for Storm to come forward, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just heard. The crew quickly surrounded the stepfather, making sure he couldn't escape. "You're not going anywhere," Storm said, his voice low and menacing. "We're taking you with us." The biker turned to Maya, who was standing behind them, her face pale but relieved. "You're safe now," he said softly. "No one is going to hurt you." The girl nodded, her eyes still wide with fear, but she managed a small smile. The biker's thoughts were already on the next step. They had to get out of there fast and figure out what to do with the stepfather. This was far from over. Maya's life had already been turned upside down, but the biker was determined to make sure she would never be hurt again. The biker could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he stood over Maya's stepfather, the man now bound and kneeling in front of him. The weight of the situation was pressing down on him. The stepfather had spilled everything: drugs, guns, and a dangerous deal that was set to go down tonight. The biker's mind raced. He had to think fast. This wasn't just about protecting Maya anymore. This was about stopping something much larger than they had anticipated. Storm, standing a few feet away, leaned in. "What now?" he asked, his voice low. The biker clenched his jaw, looking down at the man in front of him. "We take him with us. We get answers." Maya was standing in the corner of the room, her small hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes were wide, still filled with fear, but there was something else there too. A glimmer of hope. She had come to them for help, and they weren't going to let her down. "It's over now," the biker said softly, turning toward Maya. "You're safe." She nodded, but the fear still lingered in her eyes. The biker could tell she was still processing everything that had happened. He wasn't sure what the next steps were, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't leave her in this mess any longer. They needed to get her out of here and into safety, but the situation was far from resolved. "Let's move," the biker ordered, his voice steady. He turned to his crew, signaling for them to prepare to leave. They were taking Maya and her stepfather with them, but they needed to be cautious. The last thing they wanted was to walk straight into a trap. As they moved toward the exit, the biker felt a knot in his stomach. This wasn't over. The stranger, the deal, the weapons, it was all a ticking time bomb. The crew moved quickly, staying low to avoid detection. The biker's mind kept returning to Maya. She was just a little girl, caught up in something she had no control over. He couldn't help but wonder what had led her stepfather down this path. He wasn't a man to make excuses, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was likely part of a much bigger web. They made their way to the motorcycles, quickly loading up the stepfather into one of the vans the club used for emergencies. Maya climbed into the passenger seat of the biker's bike, her small hands gripping the sides tightly. The engines roared to life, the sound echoing through the quiet street. The biker kept his eyes focused ahead, knowing the next few hours were going to be crucial. As they drove, the biker's thoughts raced. The stranger's involvement, the mention of drugs, the money. This wasn't just a simple family dispute. The biker could feel the danger growing with every mile. They weren't just up against Maya's stepfather anymore. Whoever was behind this deal was dangerous, and they had to be stopped. The group rode in silence, the weight of the situation settling over them. The journey felt long, the road stretching out before them like a dark tunnel. As they neared the club's safe house, the biker's phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the other members. Got a location on the deal. It's happening at the docks, midnight. We're not the only ones looking to stop it. The biker's grip on the handlebars tightened. This was it. They were running out of time. We're going to the docks, the biker said, turning to his crew. Get ready for a fight. We're not letting them get away with this. The bike sped up, the sound of the engines cutting through the night air. As they approached the docks, the tension was palpable. The crew had made it this far, but they still didn't know what they were walking into. The docks were quiet, the moon casting an eerie glow over the water. The biker could see the shadows of men moving near the warehouse at the far end. They were getting closer. We're not the only ones, Storm said, his voice tense. The biker nodded. He could sense it too. There was something in the air, a feeling of being watched. But there was no turning back now. The biker signaled for his crew to split up, taking positions around the warehouse. They would move in carefully, no loud noises, no mistakes. As they approached the building, the biker's pulse quickened. This was it. They were going to face whatever it was head-on. The crew moved swiftly, using the shadows to stay hidden. They had the element of surprise, and they needed to use it. The biker's eyes scanned the area, his heart racing. They were close now. He could feel the adrenaline building, knowing they were about to confront the people behind this twisted deal. They were close enough now to hear the voices from inside. The deal was happening, and they couldn't let it go down. With a nod from the biker, the crew moved in, taking their positions. The biker didn't hesitate. He pushed open the door, his hand on the handle of his gun. This was the moment. They were about to stop this thing, once and for all. The biker's grip tightened on his weapon as he moved through the dark, quiet warehouse. The sound of his boots echoed in the silence, and he could feel the tension building. The crew had taken their positions, and now it was time to move in. He glanced back at Maya, who was still standing a little way behind them, her small figure barely visible in the darkness. She was scared, but she was with them, and that was all that mattered. The stepfather was being guarded by two of the club's men, and the rest of the crew was positioned strategically around the warehouse, waiting for the signal to move. The air felt thick with anticipation, and the biker could feel his heart rate picking up. The door to the warehouse creaked as he pushed it open, and the crew moved inside. They had the element of surprise, but the clock was ticking. The deal was about to go down, and they needed to stop it before it did. The lights in the warehouse flickered, casting long shadows on the floor as the biker crept further in. He could hear voices up ahead, low and muffled. He motioned for Storm and the others to move in silently, staying out of sight as much as possible. The crew was ready, their eyes sharp, their bodies tense. They had dealt with dangerous situations before, but this one felt different. The stakes were higher, and they weren't just dealing with criminals anymore. The biker's mind raced as he calculated their next move. He needed to act fast. They were nearing the center of the warehouse, where the deal was happening. From the corner of his eye, he saw the shapes of men moving in the distance, talking in hushed voices. They were the ones behind the deal. The biker's instincts kicked in. He signaled for the crew to split up and surround the men. As they moved into position, the biker took a deep breath. This was it. They were about to walk right into the heart of the danger. The biker kept his eyes on the men ahead. There were 5 of them, all standing around a large table, their attention focused on the briefcase in front of them. The air was thick with tension as one of the men spoke up. "Everything's set," he said, his voice low but clear. "The shipment will be here in an hour. We need to make sure everything's in place." The biker could feel his pulse quicken. They were talking about a shipment of drugs and guns, and they were preparing for the final part of the deal. This was bigger than they had anticipated. Storm and the others had positioned themselves around the perimeter of the room, their eyes trained on the men. The biker looked back at Maya, who was crouched behind a stack of crates. She was watching, her eyes wide, but there was a glimmer of determination in her gaze. She had been through so much already, and now she was seeing what this man, her stepfather, had been involved in. The biker knew they had to act now before the deal went through. He signaled to Storm, who nodded in return. The crew moved swiftly, their footsteps silent as they closed in on the men. The biker's heart was pounding in his chest as they approached. As they got closer, one of the men turned, his eyes scanning the room. The biker froze, but the man didn't see him. He turned back to the others, continuing the conversation. "You know what happens if this goes wrong," one of the men said. "The boss won't be happy." The biker clenched his fists. He knew the boss they were referring to. It was someone high up in the criminal world, someone who had a reputation for violence. The biker's jaw tightened. They had to stop this. As the crew moved in, the biker stepped forward, his gun raised. "Stop right there," he shouted, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. The men froze, their eyes widening in surprise. "You're not going anywhere," the biker said, his voice cold and steady. "Drop the guns, and no one gets hurt." The men hesitated for a moment, but then the biker's crew surged forward, their guns raised and their bodies blocking any escape routes. "Get down on the floor," Storm commanded. The men didn't move at first, but the biker could see the fear in their eyes. They were outnumbered, and they knew it. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, glared at the biker. "You think you can just waltz in here and stop us?" he spat. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The biker didn't flinch. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he said, his voice calm but full of conviction. "And I'm going to make sure you don't hurt anyone else." The biker motioned for one of the crew members to cuff the men. As they did, the biker turned to Maya, his expression softening. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low and reassuring. Maya nodded, a faint smile crossing her face for the first time since they had met. The biker turned back to the men, who were now kneeling on the floor, their hands behind their heads. "This ends tonight," the biker said, his voice filled with certainty. They had stopped the deal, and they weren't going to let these men destroy any more lives. The biker felt a sense of relief wash over him, but he knew this was just the beginning. Maya was safe for now, but there was still work to be done. He couldn't let his guard down just yet. The night wasn't over, and the battle was far from won. The warehouse was silent now, except for the muffled sounds of the men being cuffed and the hum of the biker's crew moving quickly to secure the area. Maya stood close to the biker, still processing everything that had happened. The fear in her eyes had started to fade, replaced with a small sense of relief, but it was clear she still had a long road ahead of her. The biker's eyes scanned the room one last time, making sure no one else was lurking in the shadows. The men who had been part of the deal were now in custody, and the drugs and weapons were secured in a corner of the warehouse. The biker turned to Maya, his voice soft but firm. "You did great," he said, trying to comfort her. Maya's eyes met his, but she didn't speak. She was exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained from everything she had been through. The biker motioned for one of the crew members to take Maya to the safe house, to get her settled and out of harm's way. He knew this was just the beginning of what she would have to face. As the crew member led Maya out of the warehouse, the biker's attention shifted back to the men on the ground. The leader, the man with the scar on his cheek, was still glaring up at him. The biker crouched down in front of him, his voice calm, but with an edge of warning. "You don't get to threaten anyone again," he said. The man spat, his mouth twisted with defiance. "You don't know who you're messing with," he growled. The biker's face hardened. "I know exactly who I'm messing with. You're going down. And when you do, I'll make sure no one else has to deal with you or your kind again." The man didn't respond, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. The biker knew the man had finally realized how deep the trouble went. The biker stood and turned to his crew, giving them a quick nod. Get them out of here. We need to make sure they don't have any backup waiting. The crew swiftly moved into action, securing the criminals and preparing them for transport. The biker's mind kept going back to Maya. He had promised to protect her, and he wasn't about to let anything slip through the cracks now. As the last of the criminals were loaded into the van, the biker looked out over the warehouse one last time, making sure the area was clear. He could feel the weight of the situation on his shoulders, but he wasn't about to let it crush him. He turned to Storm, who was walking toward him, a serious expression on his face. What's the next step? Storm asked, his voice low. The biker exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the area. We take them to the authorities. Let them deal with the rest. But we can't stop now. There's more to this than just this deal. I'm sure of it. Storm nodded. Yeah, this isn't over. But we stopped the worst of it. The biker didn't respond. He knew Storm was right, but his mind was still focused on what was coming next. Maya's life had been turned upside down, and he was going to make sure it didn't happen again. He turned to his bike, strapping on his helmet. The crew was ready to move. Let's get back to the safe house. We'll regroup and figure out what to do next. They mounted their bikes, engines roaring to life, and the convoy made its way back through the dark streets. The city was quiet now, but the biker knew that the storm wasn't over. There were still people out there, still forces working in the shadows, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. As they reached the safe house, the biker's mind was racing. Maya was inside, safe for now, but there were so many unanswered questions. What was the connection between her stepfather and the larger operation? Who was the stranger they had met behind the barracks? And who was pulling the strings behind this entire operation? He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The crew dismounted, and the biker led them inside the safe house. Maya was sitting on the couch, her head down, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up when they entered, her eyes still filled with fear. The biker knelt down in front of her, his voice gentle but firm. Maya, I need to know everything. Who was your stepfather working with? What do you know about this deal? We need to stop this, but we can't do it without your help. Maya hesitated for a moment, then looked up at him. I don't know everything, she said softly. But I know they were working with some men from out of town. They kept talking about a bigger shipment. And they were going to make a lot of money, but I don't know how it all connects. The biker nodded, his mind piecing together the information. Do you know anything about the stranger your stepfather was meeting with? Anything at all? Maya thought for a moment. His name, it was something like Mike. That's all I know. But I overheard them talking about a drop-off point. Something about a warehouse on the other side of town. The biker's eyes narrowed. This was it. They had a lead, and it was time to follow it. He stood up, his voice resolute. We're going back out. We have to stop this, and we have to do it now. The biker's mind was racing as they geared up for the next move. The information Maya had provided about the warehouse on the other side of town was crucial. The stranger's name was Mike, and the deal was going down tonight. There was no more time to waste. He turned to Storm, his most trusted crew member, his eyes sharp and focused. We move fast. We need to get there before the shipment arrives. Storm nodded without hesitation, his face hardening as he adjusted his gear. The crew was ready. The bikes were roaring to life as they rolled out of the safe house. Maya was safe for now, but her world had already been turned upside down, and the biker wasn't going to let it keep turning in the wrong direction. They rode through the dark streets, their engines echoing in the night. The wind cut through the air, but there was no time to slow down. The warehouse was only a few miles away, but the closer they got, the more tense the atmosphere became. They weren't just dealing with petty criminals anymore. They were up against a well-organized operation that had no intentions of getting caught. As they approached the area, the biker's instincts kicked in. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. Something was off. He signaled for the crew to slow down as they neared the building. The streets around the warehouse were eerily quiet. No cars in sight, no movement. But the biker wasn't fooled. The silence felt like a trap waiting to spring. Stay sharp, the biker ordered, his voice low. We're going in quietly, but we'll be ready for anything. The crew moved like shadows, their bikes parked behind a row of abandoned cars. They took cover, observing the warehouse from a distance. The biker scanned the perimeter, looking for any signs of activity. There were no guards visible, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He could feel eyes on them. They're expecting something, Storm muttered. Maybe they already know we're coming. The biker nodded, the suspicion gnawing at him. They were walking into something bigger than just a simple drug deal. It was a well-oiled machine, and they had just become the target. Let's get closer, the biker said, motioning for the crew to move in. They crept toward the warehouse, their footsteps muffled against the damp ground. The closer they got, the more the bikers' unease grew. Something wasn't right. They reached the back of the building, and the biker peeked around the corner. The lights were on inside, and he could make out figures moving in the shadows. He couldn't see much, but it was clear that the deal was in full swing. The biker gestured for the crew to get into position. They were going to surround the building and cut off any escape routes. No one was getting out of here until they had all the answers. Storm, take the east side. I'll cover the west, the biker ordered. Storm gave a sharp nod and disappeared into the darkness. The biker moved into position, his back pressed against the cold brick wall of the warehouse. He listened carefully, the sounds of the night filling his ears. The distant hum of machinery, the wind rustling through the trees. It all seemed so normal, but the danger was real. The biker's mind kept returning to Maya. She was safe for now, but for how long? He had to make sure no one ever hurt her again. The warehouse doors creaked open, and the biker's heart skipped a beat. Two men stepped outside, talking in hushed tones. They were carrying duffel bags, their faces hidden in the shadows. The biker's hand instinctively went to his gun, but he held back. He needed to know more before making a move. He waited, watching as the men walked toward a truck parked at the far side of the building. They didn't seem to notice the crew closing in on them. The biker signaled to Storm, who was already in position on the other side of the warehouse. The two men reached the truck and began loading the duffel bags into the back. The biker knew this was the moment. He moved quickly, silently, his crew closing in around the men. The truck's engine roared to life, but it wasn't going anywhere yet. The biker approached the men from behind, his voice low and menacing. Don't move, he commanded. The men froze, their hands still gripping the duffel bags. Drop them. Now. The two men hesitated for a moment, then slowly set the bags down, their faces twisted with fear. You don't want to do this, one of them said, his voice shaking. You don't know who we work for. The biker stepped forward, his eyes cold. I know exactly who you work for, he said, and I'm going to make sure this ends tonight. The other man reached for his gun, but the biker was faster. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it behind his back before slamming him to the ground. The first man tried to run, but Storm was already on him, pinning him to the ground. Not so fast, Storm growled. The biker stood over the two men, his gun trained on them. You're not going anywhere. The crew moved in quickly, securing the men and making sure they didn't have any backup hidden nearby. The biker's mind was racing. This wasn't just about stopping a drug deal anymore. It was about taking down the entire operation. We need to get them to the safe house, the biker said, turning to his crew. We're not finished yet. There's still a lot more to uncover. The men were cuffed and loaded into the back of one of the crew's vehicles. The biker didn't let his guard down. They had made a dent in the operation, but the real fight was just beginning. With a quick nod to Storm, the biker climbed onto his bike and revved the engine. The crew followed suit, the bikes roaring to life as they sped off into the night. They weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The night was far from over as the biker's crew pulled into the safe house. The tension in the air was thick, and it seemed like every corner they turned, there was a new layer of danger waiting for them. They had secured the men from the warehouse, but the deeper they went, the more complicated the situation became. The biker parked his bike and turned off the engine, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The safe house, a rundown building on the outskirts of town, had served its purpose many times before, but tonight, it felt more like a temporary shelter than a true safe haven. He pushed open the door and entered, motioning for the rest of the crew to follow. The men they had captured were already secured in one of the back rooms, their hands cuffed behind their backs, their eyes filled with anger and fear. Maya, sitting quietly in the corner of the room, looked up as the biker entered. Her face was still pale, her eyes full of questions, but there was a quiet resilience in the way she held herself. Maya, the biker said softly as he approached her, you're safe here. We're going to take care of everything. She nodded, but he could see that she was still holding on to something. Some fear, some uncertainty that hadn't been shaken off just yet. The biker's heart went out to her. She had been through so much already, and though she was safe for now, the road to healing would be long. "We'll get you out of here soon," he promised, his voice firm. He turned away from her, addressing his crew. "All right, we need to go over everything. We got the men, but there's more to this. We need to know who else is involved, and we need to figure out what the bigger picture is. These guys might be small-time players, but we've got a lead on something much bigger." Storm, who had been quietly observing the situation, spoke up. "The shipment they were talking about, this isn't just drugs. I'm sure of it. There's something else going on here, something they don't want getting out." The biker nodded. "I agree. This isn't just about drug money. This is something deeper. Whoever is behind this has more at stake than just a couple of bags of cash." "What's our next move?" one of the other crew members asked, looking at the biker with an expectant gaze. The biker ran a hand over his face, taking a deep breath. "We get answers. I'm not going to let this go. We need to find out who the boss is, who's pulling the strings." He turned back to the two men they had captured, still sitting in the corner of the room, their eyes hard with defiance. He walked up to them, his voice low and steady. "You can either tell me everything, or you can waste more of my time. But you're not leaving here until I get answers. Your choice." The men exchanged a look, and for a brief moment, the biker thought they might hold out, but then the man with the scar on his cheek spoke up. "You don't know what you're up against," he growled, his voice full of venom. "We've got people watching us. You think you can stop this? You don't know who you're dealing with." The biker leaned in, his voice dangerously calm. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and I'm going to make sure your people know exactly who I am too." The man flinched, but he didn't say anything more. The biker's patience was wearing thin, but he kept his cool. "Start talking. Who's the boss? Where's the next deal going down?" The man with the scar hesitated, but then he finally spoke. "It's not just one person. It's a whole network. The boss? He's untouchable. But the next deal? It's happening at the docks, tomorrow night. If you want to stop it, you better be ready to fight." The biker's mind was already racing, processing the information. The docks. Of course. The place where everything came to a head. He knew this was it, the final showdown. He turned to Storm and the others. "We go in tomorrow. We hit them hard, but we move fast. We're not letting this deal go through." Storm nodded. "We're with you." The biker turned back to the two men, his eyes cold. "And you?" The man with the scar glared at him, but didn't say anything. The biker gave him a hard stare. "You'll be the first one we come for if this goes south. I won't hesitate." He stepped away, his mind still on the task at hand. "We need to rest, but not for long. Tomorrow, we go in strong, and we take down the whole operation." Maya's voice broke through the tension in the room. "What about my stepdad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker turned to her, his face softening. "He'll be taken care of. But right now, I need you to stay here, where it's safe. We're going to finish this, and we'll make sure no one ever hurts you again." Maya nodded, a flicker of trust in her eyes. The biker gave her a reassuring smile. Before turning back to the crew, "All right, everyone, get some rest. We've got a long day ahead of us." As the crew settled into the safe house, the biker couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something much bigger. The docks, the deal, the people behind it all. It was all coming together, and the biker was ready to bring it to an end, no matter the cost. The countdown had begun. Tomorrow, they would face the storm head-on. The biker woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing. The room was still dark, the early morning hours creeping in, but there was no time to rest. He glanced at the screen. One of his crew members had sent him a message. "We have eyes on the docks. It's happening tonight. Be ready." The message sent a chill through him. Tonight was the night. Everything they had worked for was coming to a head. He stood up, stretching his sore muscles, the weight of the task ahead pressing heavily on his chest. The plan had been set. The crew had regrouped and was ready. There would be no more waiting. They had the information they needed, and it was time to strike. The biker walked quietly through the safe house, careful not to wake Maya. She was still asleep, curled up on the couch, looking fragile but at peace for the first time in days. He couldn't help but feel a pang of protectiveness as he watched her. She had come to them for help, and they weren't about to let her down. But tonight, they had to face what lay ahead. He pulled on his jacket, checked his gear, and grabbed his helmet. The crew was already gathering outside, their bikes lined up, engines revving in anticipation. He walked out, taking a deep breath as the cold air hit his face. This was it. No more second-guessing. "Everyone ready?" he asked, his voice steady but determined. Storm, who had been his right hand throughout this entire operation, nodded. "Ready when you are." The rest of the crew gave their silent agreement. The biker's eyes scanned the group. These were the men who had his back no matter what. They had all seen the dark side of the world, and tonight, they were ready to take it down. "We move in silence," the biker said. "We take out any threats, secure the shipment, and get out. We don't take chances." He looked over at the crew one more time, making sure they were all focused. The gravity of the situation hung in the air, but there was no room for fear. This was their moment to end this once and for all. The bikes roared to life, and the crew took off, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they sped toward the docks. The closer they got, the more tense the atmosphere became. The streets were eerily quiet, as if the entire city was holding its breath. The docks loomed ahead, the outline of the warehouse barely visible in the distance. The biker's mind raced. The operation they were about to take down wasn't just about stopping a shipment. It was about bringing down the entire criminal network. They were fighting not just for Maya, but for anyone who had ever been crushed under the weight of men like the ones they were about to face. As they approached the docks, the biker gave the signal for the crew to slow down. They parked their bikes in the shadows and dismounted, moving quickly but quietly. "We split up," the biker said, his voice low. "Storm, you're with me. The rest of you, cover the perimeter. We don't let anyone slip through." They moved in, staying low, their footsteps muffled against the concrete. The sound of distant waves crashing against the shore barely reached their ears. The biker's senses were heightened. Every shadow, every flicker of movement felt like a threat. They crept toward the warehouse, their eyes scanning the area. From the corner of his eye, the biker saw two men talking near the back door of the building. They were heavily armed. It was clear they were expecting someone. The biker motioned for Storm to follow him as they moved toward the rear entrance. They needed to get inside, gather intel, and take out anyone who stood in their way. The crew was positioned around the building, each member watching for any sign of trouble. As they neared the back door, the biker's heart raced. This was the moment they had been working toward. The door was slightly ajar, and the biker could hear voices coming from inside. He signaled to Storm, who nodded in understanding. They moved closer, their backs pressed against the cold walls of the warehouse. The biker's mind was sharp. They were getting closer, and the stakes were higher than ever. "We go in fast," the biker whispered. "No hesitation." Storm nodded, his face hardening. The two men at the door still hadn't noticed them. The biker took a deep breath and silently counted to 3 in his mind. On the third count, he lunged forward, pushing the door open with force. The two men inside froze, startled by the sudden intrusion. "Stay down," the biker ordered as he kicked the door wide open. The men raised their guns, but before they could react, the biker and Storm were on them, disarming them in a swift motion. The sound of the guns hitting the floor echoed in the warehouse. "Move," the biker growled as they moved deeper into the building. The two men were forced to the ground, their hands bound quickly. The biker's eyes were scanning the area, looking for the shipment. They couldn't waste any time. "Where is it?" he demanded. One of the men, still panting from the surprise attack, spoke through clenched teeth. "The shipment's in the back room, but you won't make it out alive." The biker's expression didn't change. "We'll see about that." They pushed through the hallway, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the operation. As they reached the back room, the biker's pulse quickened. There it was, the shipment. Bags of drugs, stacks of money, and weapons lined up neatly, ready for delivery. It was all happening right under their noses. The biker turned to Storm. "We take it all down." Now, the crew rushed in, securing the area, confiscating everything in sight. They had stopped the deal, but the war wasn't over. The biker could feel the weight of their victory, but he knew this was just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle. Tonight, they had won a battle, but the fight was far from over. The warehouse was now under control. The biker stood at the entrance of the back room, looking over the piles of cash, drugs, and weapons scattered on the floor. It was everything they had been chasing after, everything they had fought for. But as he scanned the room, his thoughts weren't on the goods, they were on the bigger picture. They had stopped one operation, but there were many more like it out there. And the people behind these operations weren't going to just give up. The biker turned to his crew, who were busy securing the area and gathering the evidence. "We've got what we came for," he said, his voice steady, but filled with urgency. "Now we need to make sure this doesn't go to waste. We're not just taking down these men, we're sending a message." Storm nodded from across the room, his face hard as stone. "They won't be able to hide behind their money and guns anymore. We've got the proof." The biker looked over at Maya, who was sitting in the corner of the room, watching everything unfold. She had been through so much, and now, seeing the warehouse cleared, he hoped that a part of her fear was gone. He walked over to her, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "You're safe now," he said softly. "No one is going to hurt you anymore. We're taking care of this." Maya looked up at him, her face pale but with a hint of relief in her eyes. She didn't speak, but the silent gratitude in her gaze was enough for the biker to know they were on the right path. The biker stood and turned to the rest of his crew. "We're leaving now. We take the evidence to the authorities, and we don't stop until we've burned this operation to the ground." The crew quickly gathered the drugs, weapons, and cash, preparing to leave the warehouse. The biker kept his focus, knowing that they couldn't afford to make mistakes. As they moved toward the exit, the sounds of sirens could be heard in the distance. The biker's heart raced. The authorities were on their way, and they needed to be gone before they arrived. The crew quickly piled into the vehicles, Maya following closely behind. The biker motioned for Storm to get in one of the vans, while he climbed into the driver's seat of his bike. They had to move fast. As the convoy sped out of the warehouse parking lot, the biker's thoughts drifted back to the deal they had just shut down. It was a victory, but he knew it was only a small piece of the puzzle. The men they had captured might be off the streets, but there were still so many others out there, still pulling the strings. He couldn't let his guard down yet. The convoy sped through the streets, the sound of their engines cutting through the night air. The biker's mind was sharp, calculating the next move. They had the evidence, but they needed to make sure it didn't disappear into the system. "We need to get to the drop point, make sure we hand everything over directly to the right people," the biker said into his helmet's radio. "We're not taking any chances." The crew agreed silently, their determination clear. They weren't going to let all their work be undone. As they neared the safe drop point, the biker's eyes narrowed. He could feel the pressure building, the weight of the operation heavy on his shoulders. They were close to finishing what they had started, but there were still risks. If they didn't act fast enough, the whole operation could collapse. As they parked the vehicles in the dark alley, the biker climbed off his bike and moved toward the back of the van. He opened the doors, revealing the evidence they had secured. The bags of drugs, the stacks of cash, and the weapons. They had everything they needed. "We're handing this over now," the biker said, his voice low. Storm moved up beside him, his eyes scanning the street. "We don't have long. The longer we stay here, the more likely something goes wrong." The biker nodded. "Get ready. We move as soon as we have the contact." As if on cue, a figure stepped out of the shadows. The biker's eyes immediately locked onto him. This was their contact. He was tall, his face shadowed by the hood of his jacket, but there was something about him that felt off. The biker's instincts flared. This wasn't the man they were supposed to meet. He stepped forward, his voice cautious. "You're not who we were expecting." The man gave a slight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The man you were supposed to meet? He's not coming." The biker's pulse quickened. "What does that mean?" he demanded. The man didn't answer directly. "The deal's changed. Things are getting bigger." The biker's eyes narrowed. He could tell something wasn't right, but he needed answers. "Who are you working for?" he asked, his tone sharp. The man just smirked and shook his head. "You don't need to know that. Just hand over the goods." The biker's grip tightened on the bag of evidence in his hands. He didn't trust this guy, not for a second. "I'm not handing anything over until you tell me who you're really working for," the biker said, his voice cold and demanding. The man's smirk faded, and he reached for something under his jacket. The biker was already moving, his instincts screaming at him. He grabbed the man's wrist before he could pull whatever weapon he was reaching for. A quick twist, and the man was on the ground, gasping for breath. The biker stood over him, gun drawn. "You're not in control anymore." He took a deep breath, his mind working fast. He wasn't going to let anyone slip away, not tonight. He motioned to his crew. "We're getting the evidence to the right people." Now, the night wasn't over, and there were still questions to be answered, but the biker was determined to finish what he had started. The fight wasn't over yet, and the stakes were higher than ever. The tension in the air was thick as the biker and his crew moved swiftly through the dark streets. The exchange at the alley had gone wrong, again. The mysterious figure they had met had been uncooperative, and now they were back on the move, the weight of the operation hanging heavily on their shoulders. The man, who had claimed the deal was getting bigger, hadn't provided any answers. The biker's mind raced as they drove, wondering who else was involved in this operation and why they had been ambushed. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him, but there was no time for questions. They had to act fast. The biker reached for his radio. Everyone stay alert. We're heading to the drop-off. If something's off, we move. No hesitation. His voice was calm, but his mind was far from at ease. They couldn't afford to mess this up. The crew followed closely behind as they navigated the winding streets, the streetlights flickering above them. The biker's grip tightened on his handlebars. The docks were getting closer, but there was still no sign of the authorities. He had expected them to show up by now, but the silence was unnerving. Something didn't feel right. As they neared the docks, the bikers signaled for the crew to slow down. They parked in the shadows, making sure to keep their bikes out of sight. The dim light of the docks stretched out ahead of them, casting eerie shadows along the cold, wet pavement. The warehouse stood at the far end of the pier, quiet and ominous. The air smelled of salt water and rust, and the sound of waves crashing against the pier only added to the tension. The biker motioned for his crew to move in. They crept toward the building, their footsteps silent on the wet ground. The crew fanned out, taking positions around the building to make sure they weren't caught off guard. The biker and Storm approached the back door, the familiar weight of his gun against his side. He had hoped that this would be the end of it, that they would find the answers they needed and put an end to this operation. But as they reached the door, the biker's instincts told him they were walking into something much bigger. He glanced over at Storm, who gave him a nod, signaling that he was ready. The biker pushed the door open slowly, careful not to make a sound. They slipped inside, their eyes adjusting to the dim light. The inside of the warehouse was vast, the sound of their breathing echoing off the walls. The biker signaled for everyone to stay low and move cautiously. They crept deeper into the warehouse, their eyes scanning every corner. The silence was unnerving. No guards, no workers. It was almost too quiet. As they approached the center of the room, the biker heard faint voices coming from behind a set of crates. He signaled for the crew to stop and crouched down behind the crates, listening. "This is it," one of the voices said, muffled but clear enough. "The shipment's ready. We just need to get it out of here and into the truck." The biker's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment. The deal was happening right in front of them, and they had to act fast. He motioned for Storm and the others to move in, their movements quick but quiet. They were close now, so close. As they got closer, the biker could make out the figures of several men standing around large crates, clearly preparing for the shipment to be loaded onto a truck. The goods were all there, everything they had been hunting for. Drugs, weapons, and money. The biker's hand went to his gun, ready to take control of the situation. He didn't hesitate. "Drop the crates," he shouted, his voice carrying across the warehouse. The men froze, turning toward him with shocked expressions. "You're not getting away with this," the biker said, his voice steady and cold. "Get on the ground." The men hesitated for a moment, but the biker could see the fear in their eyes. They knew they were trapped. Before they could move, Storm and the others were on them, disarming them and forcing them to the ground. The biker moved forward, his eyes scanning the crates. This was it, the moment they had worked for. But as he got closer, something caught his eye. A piece of paper, sticking out of one of the crates. He picked it up, quickly scanning the contents. His eyes widened. It was a list of names, addresses, and coded messages. The biker's mind raced as he processed the information. This was bigger than they had thought. This wasn't just a local operation. This was a network. "Storm, we've got a problem," the biker said, his voice tense. "This isn't just a shipment. It's a whole network, and we need to take it down before it spreads any further." Storm looked at him, his face hardening. "What do we do?" The biker clenched his fists, his mind working quickly. "We take this to the authorities, but we don't stop there. We make sure these names are exposed. This is just the beginning." They quickly gathered the evidence and moved out, securing the criminals and preparing to leave. The biker knew this wasn't the end. It was just the start of something much bigger. The streets outside the warehouse were still quiet, But the biker couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was only just beginning. They had put a dent in the operation, but now, the real fight was about to start. The authorities would have the evidence, but it was up to them to take down the rest. They climbed onto their bikes, the engines roaring to life. As they drove off into the night, the bikers' thoughts were already on what was next. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The bikers' crew had just wrapped up their most dangerous mission yet. The warehouse operation was taken down, but even as the crew loaded the evidence into the van, the biker couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. They had what they needed, but the deeper they dug, the bigger the hole seemed to be. He sat at the edge of the van, staring at the list of names and coded messages they had recovered. His mind kept returning to one thing. Who was at the top of this operation? Who was pulling the strings? Storm, any word from the authorities yet? The biker asked as his eyes scanned the list, searching for something that might give him a lead. Storm, who had been keeping watch as the crew worked, walked over. They're taking the evidence, but they're slow to act. These things take time, and we don't have it. The biker's jaw tightened. We don't have the luxury of time. He knew they couldn't wait for the authorities to get their act together. This operation was too large, and the people behind it were too dangerous. The biker stood up, his mind made up. We're not waiting around for permission. We take the fight to them ourselves. Storm nodded, his expression hardening. What's the plan? We need to follow the trail, the biker said, glancing at the list again. These names, these addresses, it's all connected. Whoever's at the top is making moves, and we need to find them before they get away. He turned to the rest of the crew. Everyone pack up. We've got work to do. The crew quickly gathered their things and piled into the vehicles. The biker had already mapped out their next move. They would head to the locations on the list, hoping to get one step closer to the mastermind behind the operation. The engines roared to life as the crew set off into the night, the weight of the situation pressing on them. Maya, who had been quiet the entire time, sat in the back of the van. Her face was still pale, but there was a quiet resolve in her eyes now. She had seen what her stepfather was involved in, and the biker could tell she wasn't going to let this go easily. You good back there? The biker called out to her over his shoulder. Maya nodded, her voice barely audible. Yeah, just tired. The biker's heart went out to her. She had been through more than any kid should ever have to experience, but he could see the strength in her. She wasn't the scared little girl who had knocked on their door anymore. You're safe now, the biker said gently, his voice reassuring. We're going to make sure of it. They drove for miles, passing through streets that felt emptier than usual. The city was silent, but the biker knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. They reached the first address on the list, a rundown building on the outskirts of town. The crew parked a block away, keeping their distance. The biker motioned for Storm to lead the way. We're checking every door, every window. We don't know who we're walking into, but we're not taking any chances. The crew moved in slowly, keeping their heads down and their eyes peeled. The air was thick with tension as they approached the building. The biker could feel it in his bones. They were getting closer to something dangerous. They split up, moving around the building to cover all angles. The biker and Storm moved to the front entrance, ready to breach, if necessary. As they got closer to the door, the sound of muffled voices reached their ears. The biker stopped in his tracks, signaling for Storm to stay back. They listened for a moment, trying to make sense of the conversation. It was hard to hear, but there was one word that stood out: shipment. The biker's pulse quickened. This was it. He nodded to Storm, and they moved into position. Without warning, the biker kicked the door open, rushing inside. The men inside froze, their eyes wide with surprise. Before they could react, the biker and Storm had them on the ground, their weapons taken away in a swift motion. The rest of the crew rushed in, securing the area. The biker's heart was racing as he approached the men, who were now lying face down on the floor. Who's in charge here? The biker demanded, his voice cold. The men exchanged nervous glances, but none of them spoke. The biker stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. I'm not asking again, he growled. One of the men, a lanky figure with a scar across his cheek, finally spoke up. You won't get away with this. We've got people everywhere. The biker didn't flinch. I'm already making sure you don't get away with anything. Where's your boss? The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously. You don't get it. He's untouchable. The biker's eyes narrowed. Everyone can be touched, he said flatly. Where is he? The man hesitated for a moment before reluctantly giving up an address. He's at a safe house, about 20 miles out of town. You'll never make it in time. The biker turned to Storm. Get the crew. We're going to that safe house. Storm nodded. You heard him. Let's go. The biker turned back to the men on the floor. You're lucky we're not finished with you yet, he said, his voice filled with warning. You're going to answer for everything, and you're going to do it the hard way. With that, the crew filed out of the building, heading for their next destination. The biker's mind was racing. The safe house. This was it. This was where the mastermind was hiding, and the biker wasn't going to let him slip away. The road ahead was long, but the end was in sight. The crew sped off into the night, the engines of their bikes roaring to life. The storm was coming, and they were ready for it. The biker's crew was closing in on the safe house. The distance from the warehouse had been covered in what seemed like seconds, their engines roaring through the dark streets. A symphony of speed and determination. The air was thick with anticipation. The mastermind they had been chasing was just ahead, and the biker knew this was the moment to end it. They reached the house, a dilapidated structure on the outskirts of town, barely lit by a single flickering light. The biker parked his bike and motioned for the crew to stay silent. We move in, quick and quiet, he said, his voice firm and low. The crew nodded, each man understanding the gravity of the situation. They had tracked this operation for weeks, and now, they were about to take down the head of the entire network. The crew spread out, their movements practiced and fluid. The biker could feel his heart racing, but his mind was clear. There was no room for fear now. This was what they had trained for. The crew reached the back of the house first. They moved in, weapons at the ready, but the place was eerily quiet. No guards, no alarms. It was almost too easy. It's a trap, Storm muttered, his voice barely audible. The biker nodded. He felt it too. It was too quiet, too perfect. They had underestimated the mastermind. He motioned for the crew to spread out and cover every exit. He wasn't going to let anyone slip away. As they moved through the house, the biker's senses heightened. His eyes scanned every corner, his ears straining to catch the slightest sound. They reached the main room, the floor creaking beneath their boots. Then, a voice rang out, sharp and cold. You're too late. The biker froze, his hand instinctively going to his gun. Standing in the center of the room was the man they had been chasing, the mastermind. He was tall, with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. His face was familiar, but the biker hadn't expected him to be this close. The man's lips curled into a twisted smile. I knew you'd come. I've been waiting for this. The biker didn't hesitate. You're done, he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. The man chuckled, a low, menacing sound. Am I? You have no idea what you're dealing with. You've just scratched the surface. The biker's mind raced. Who else is involved? He demanded. The man's smile faltered. You think it's just me? There are people in places you'll never reach. The network is vast. You're out of your depth. The biker stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. Not anymore. You're going to pay for everything you've done. Without warning, the man lunged for a nearby desk, but the biker was faster. He grabbed the man by the wrist, twisting it with practiced ease. The man let out a yelp of pain, but didn't resist. You're going down, the biker said, tightening his grip. Now, tell me everything. The man's expression darkened, and for a moment, the biker saw something close to fear flicker in his eyes. You'll never stop it. They'll come for you. They always do. The biker leaned in closer, his voice a low growl. Not this time. Just as the man opened his mouth to say something more, a loud crash came from upstairs. The crew instantly went into defensive mode, weapons raised and ready. The biker motioned for Storm to check it out. Keep him here, the biker ordered. Storm nodded and moved quickly up the stairs. The biker kept his focus on the man, who was now glaring at him with malice. You think you've won? You're just pawns in a bigger game, the man spat. You'll never get the full picture. The biker leaned in, his face inches from the man's. We'll see about that. Meanwhile, Storm's voice echoed down the stairs. Biker, we've got company. The biker's heart sank. This wasn't over. He could feel the shift in the air, something had changed. Stay with him. The biker ordered one of the crew members as he turned to rush up the stairs. His mind was focused. They had come too far to let this slip away. As he reached the top of the stairs, he saw Storm crouched down, peering out of a window. They're coming fast, Storm said. Get ready. The biker felt the familiar adrenaline surge through his veins. They had to finish this. They couldn't afford to let the mastermind escape. Not now. Not after everything they had done. We're not leaving until we've shut this down for good, the biker said, his voice filled with resolve. The crew quickly moved into position, taking up defensive stances at windows and doors. The sound of engines grew louder in the distance. They were being surrounded. We're going to hold this position, the biker said, his mind running through the options. We take them out one by one, no mercy. He glanced over at the mastermind, still sitting bound and helpless. You're not getting away, the biker said. Not tonight. The roar of engines outside signaled that the enemy was closing in. The crew braced for the fight. This was it, the final stand. As the first wave of men burst through the door, guns drawn, the biker and his crew were ready. They moved with precision, taking down one threat after another. The biker's heart was pounding, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand. The fight was fierce, but with every moment, the crew pushed back. The mastermind's grip on the network was weakening, and they weren't going to stop until it was gone completely. After what felt like hours, the last of the enemies had been taken down. The house was silent once again. The biker stood, breathing heavily, his eyes scanning the aftermath. They had won. But as he looked around, he knew this was just the beginning. They had taken down one operation, but the network was still out there. It was bigger than they had imagined. But tonight, they had made a statement. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for everyone who had been hurt by the darkness lurking in the shadows. The biker turned to Storm. We're not done yet, he said. This war's just starting. The crew nodded, knowing that the battle was far from over. But for now, they had won. And that victory would be remembered. In this gripping chapter of Hell Angels stories, we dive into the dangerous world of bikers as they navigate through dark alleys and abandoned warehouses in pursuit of justice. The crew, led by a fearless biker, takes down a vast criminal network involved in trafficking and illegal dealings. The mission takes them through tense confrontations, unexpected traps, and intense showdowns as they move from one lead to another. With Maya, a young girl who has already seen too much darkness, at their side, the biker and his team must make sure to take down the masterminds behind it all. The Hell Angels stories unfold as the crew faces constant threats, betrayal, and unforeseen dangers in the fight for survival. With each turn, the biker comes closer to uncovering the truth, but the deeper they go, the more the stakes rise. The mission culminates in a powerful confrontation at the safe house, where the crew must fight to survive against overwhelming odds. In the end, this thrilling chapter of Hell Angels stories shows the true spirit of loyalty, justice, and the relentless pursuit of those who would destroy the lives of the innocent. Join the crew in their high-octane journey as they race against time to stop the criminals behind the operation and bring them to justice. The Hell Angels stories continue to capture the intensity and heart-pounding action of this unforgettable ride.